Okay, I guess we'll get started. So hi everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Lindsey Messervy. I am a senior organizational designer at MadPow as part of the design transformation practice. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Design transformation is people have a lot of questions about what that is, so I'll just talk briefly about that. I also wanted to introduce a couple of folks on the MadPow end who are going to be helping me today. So we have Liz Corthell, who is an experienced strategist at MadPow. Say hi, Liz.
Hello.
She's going to be helping me keep tabs on the chat box and sharing her insights as well throughout the session. I also have Ryan Queenan, who is our marketing manager at MadPow. He's kind of going to be helping with the tech stuff and keeping things running in the back end.
Welcome, everybody.
Great. So a couple quick housekeeping items. We'll go till from 10 to noon today. If you have to step out, that's totally fine. We're going to be doing a mix of presentation and collaborative activities through Mural, which is a collaborative whiteboard. If you've attended some of our other sessions, it's you're probably pretty familiar with it by now. So we'll be sharing out, oh, perfect. Ryan, if you go to the chat box, he shared out the Mural link. So feel free to go to the chat, click on the link to get the Mural set up in your browser. We won't be using it quite yet, so feel free to just kind of have it load and we'll explore it in a couple minutes. Also, if you have questions at any point during the session, if there's anything burning that you really want to make sure I'm hitting on, feel free to interrupt me. I'll try to keep interruptions to a minimum, but if there's anything that you feel like you need to hear more about, feel free to do that. Otherwise, you can raise your hand through Zoom, or you can put a question in the chat box and Liz will alert me to it. Okay, I think those are the big housekeeping topics. So let's dig right in. So first off, I'm glad everyone is here to explore this topic of navigating organizational disruption and transformation. In a moment, we'll have an activity where we're going to be doing introductions so you can see who else is in the room with you. And it'll be a chance to learn a little bit more about what brings you to the workshop today. But first, to orient you to the topic, I thought it would be helpful just to go through my exploration of this topic and why I think it's important for us to talk about and explore. To first orient you, it's helpful just to start with design transformation. Again, that's the practice that I'm part of at MadPow. So design transformation, this work really emerged out of our work in design transformation. And what design transformation is, it's an application of organizational design that seeks to align people, processes, environments, and technology in order to achieve a certain organizational outcome, whether that's efficiency, productivity, growth. Our focus at MadPow, our organizational outcome that we're seeking to produce is really helping evolve the way that organizations leverage design-based approaches. So design and innovation to create more human-centered solutions. So that could be products, services, spaces, interfaces, whatever it may be. But we really seek to use organizational design as a lens to help teams, people, and organizations themselves be more human-centered in their practices and leverage design. So as we do this work, a lot of the times we are looking at organizational changes through the lens, through a couple different lenses. We look at the artifacts. So that's the processes, the tools, the technologies, the protocols, the kind of tangible things that make up, that are a part of an organization that kind of help keep people aligned and understanding what they should be doing and help them do their work. We also look at behaviors. So how an organization is supporting and facilitating certain behaviors in order to achieve a certain outcome, or trying to kind of dissuade certain behaviors from happening. And then we also look at beliefs, how an organization's values, their mission statements, the principles that guide them, how those impact, actually filter down into people's behaviors and the artifacts that make up an organization. And so I bring this up because I found throughout my design career, I started actually kind of exploring artifacts, so product design and service design. So helping to inform and build and develop things that people can use, that people can engage with. I then started to explore the experience design and experience strategy. So thinking about how we use behavior and behavior change to help make products and services and experiences better for people. And then as I've been exploring organizational design and business model design, that starts to get into that beliefs, the kind of mindsets and mental models that people have about the way that the world works in order to help affect and impact change. And what I found is that at a very simplistic level, there's a variance around complexity of the challenges that we were dealing with. Again, at a very simplistic level, product design, has kind of clear boundaries around where the constraints around what you can design. Interface is an interface, and there might be a little, some other things that emerge out of that, but generally you know exactly what you're supposed to be designing for. When you get into organizational design and you start to impact all of these different things, they're all interconnected and interwoven, and it is really hard to put your arms around exactly what, how to make the most of the design process and how to impact change in the most effective way. And so all this to say is that, when I started my career in organizational design, I found that a lot of times if, I was using a very similar design process to what I was exploring in product design, service design, and experience design, and they weren't necessarily having the same impacts. They weren't, it wasn't building in a level of complexity that was needed. We would take one step forward in making change, and then that would kind of set us 2 steps back. Or, we would make one change in one area and that would have rippling effects on another. And it just made it clear that we're really working with organizational design and kind of these larger scale problems. We're working in a complex system of networks where all of these interconnections between people, processes, values, and beliefs all are merging into one. So, as our work has been exploring this topic of organizational disruption and transformation and the different levels of complexity that we're dealing with, we've picked up some learnings along the way. And now, as we as a whole society have been dealing with COVID over the past the past 5 or 6 months now, we're continuing to navigate all of this complexity that's coming out of how to navigate through this pandemic, not just within our work, but within our lives. And it felt like the right time to bring forth some of these learnings, around what we found in dealing with in navigating organizational design and kind of this more complex way of working, and how we're bringing that to organizational disruption through the pandemic, and other things that happen in the world, economic downturns, mergers and acquisition, all of these organizational disruptions that are starting to be more perpetual. So this session is really meant to be starting as a conversation to learn a little bit more about the impacts of COVID. So we'll do a quick activity after we do our introductions to talk about the impacts of COVID, both on how it's impacted you personally and how it's impacted your organization. We'll dig into complexity a little bit more. It's helping to define it and make sense of it. We'll do a quick reflection activity, reflecting back on the kind of our experiences with COVID. And then we'll be digging into designing for emergence, what that means, what that looks like, what that feels like. And towards the end of the session, we'll actually spend the bulk of it digging into some exercises where we're actually going to have you explore a complex challenge and start to kind of parse out different ways of thinking about it in the hopes that that'll kind of give you some clarity about how you can start getting your hands around where to start and how you might impact change. And that'll be the bulk of the session. So again, we'll do a mix of presentation and activities over the next few hours. So just a couple upfront framing around this workshop. Again, this is an exploration into the topic of organizational disruption and complexity and how it affects us, our work, and our teams. Obviously, this is a very, very, very big topic, and we only have 2 hours. You know, we can't begin to cover all of it. So to make the most of our time, I'll be covering bits and pieces of it, but focusing on how we as individuals can best respond to disruption. That's with the understanding that there's a whole other topic we can explore around how you start shifting teams and whole organizations to be more agile and to be able to respond to complexity and disruption more. But that's another topic for another day. But you know, we'd love to talk with you if you're interested in exploring that. We'd love to talk to you more about that. So feel free to reach out. That being said, all of the activities and the frameworks that we're going to be walking through today can be done with your own teams. You can bring it in as you see fit. And we'll be sharing the slides, we'll be sharing the recording, and the activities that we'll be doing after the session is done. So you can keep a lookout for that in your email. Okay, I'll take a breath. Any burning questions at this point? Great. So what we'll do is have everyone go to the mural board. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can navigate to the mural board. And
hey, Lindsay, sorry to interrupt you. It's
yes.
Ryan. Could you please take a look at the waiting room? We have some people that are trying to get in.
Yep, I just let someone in. I don't see any others.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let me share my screen. And so again, the link to the mural board should be up in the chat box. Let us know if you're having any trouble with that. And what we're going to be doing is first starting with introductions. So you can see here, there's a whole big list of sticky notes. Copying what Liz and I have been doing, if you could put your name, your role in your organization, and just a quick note of what brings you here today, we can start to understand who's in the room and learn a little bit more about you. You'll notice a couple tips on Mural. You can use the Zoom here to go in and out, or you can click on the Zoom settings and depending on if you're using a computer trackpad or a mouse, you can change how you can zoom. If you hold down the space bar, you can click and drag and move around the board a little bit easier. And yeah, if you just click and start typing in a sticky note, then that can help. So I'll let you guys take a minute or two to fill in your stickies. If you need to adjust the size of the font, you can do that as well, or adjust the size of the sticky. Okay, we'll take 30 more seconds to finish up. Again, if you're having trouble accessing the mural board, just let us know.
Okay, I'm seeing in the chat someone seems to be stuck on the loading screen. So this is a fairly big mural board, so it might just take a little bit of extra time. You can always reopen your browser, start it again. Hopefully it should load a little quicker. Oh,
looks like that solved it. Thanks, Liz.
Excellent. Yep, the tech problem of naming it and saying it, that always makes it go away. So.
Great, so it looks like we have a nice range of folks in the room. And just looking at your reasons for being here, looking for new approaches, looking for new ways to evolve and grow our capabilities, hearing how others have navigated this situation. Yep, we'll be talking a little bit more about that. Sorry, my cats might be making an appearance here. Great. Yep, so learning from others during these COVID times. Great, so feel free if you're still adding yourself in there, feel free to do that. We're gonna be using this basically where you have your name here. There'll be another activity where we're going to have you click on the little black dot here to navigate to your own personal board, but we don't need to do that yet. So great, so I am going to go back to the slides. So we did the introductions. The next activity we'd like to do is current state of mind. So thinking about your current state of mind, we know we've been navigating COVID, the pandemic, and the impacts of that for the last 5 months. We want to learn a little bit more about how it's impacted your work or your life in general. So this is just a kind of a fun little activity to learn a little bit more about where people's heads are at. So what we're gonna do, I'll open up that part of the mural board. If you just scroll over to the right, you'll see current state of mind. But till then, if you open up your browser, go to Google Images, or you can go to the website Giphy to choose an image that you feel best represents your current state of mind. Copy and paste that image into the mural board, and we'll see what's there. So take a second. Things are disappearing on me. Hold on, let me.
What was the website you said? Iffy?
Giphy, G-I-F.
Oh, Giphy.
Sorry, G-I-P-H-Y. you'll see the instructions at the top of the new area,
Okay, thank you.
current state of mind.
Sorry.
No, thank you for asking.
Seeing a little bit of parallel thinking in there already.
See a lot of fires. We'll take about 1 more minute to find an image and post it up here. Okay. So I'm curious about, I think I can interpret the things being set on fire pretty well. I'm curious to know about the person being stretched. Whoever put that up, do you mind unmuting yourself and telling us a little bit more about that? You're willing to
Yeah,
share?
that was mine. Matt, I'm product designer at Humana. That's me. I'm a parent of 2 small children, 2.5 and 6. We have a 12-week-old puppy, and my wife works full time as well. So we're splitting 8-hour days, parenting 2 small children, raising a puppy, and so yeah, just pulled in a lot of different directions every single day for months on end. It's exhausting.
Understandable. Yep, I know that well as well. um, Thank you for sharing. What about, let's see, I think this is from the 70s show, The Mom Laughing. Anyone want to share more about that?
That's me, Ashley Ani. I'm a consumer experience designer at Optum. My motto these days is if we don't laugh, we'll cry. So that's what inspired that.
It's a nice way to think about the current situation, bringing a little humor into things. Okay. What about Spider-Man, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday?
Yeah, that was me. It's hard to differentiate between the days if I'm just on, WebEx every day.
Yep. I feel that we were facilitating 2-hour remote workshops almost every day last week. And so it felt like the guy hitting his head on the computer. Too much Zoom. Okay. Anyone else just want to share their image and what it means to them? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Well, thanks for humoring us for that. What we're going to be doing, as I alluded to, is thinking about how this has impacted our organizations and how our organizations have responded. So I'm going to open up the next part of the board just below where we put our images. You can see here what we're actually, I'll switch over to the slides so I can give the proper instructions. Bear with me for a second. So organizational responses to COVID. We know that, again, we've been navigating this for several months. So what we want to do is thinking about your own organization's internal response to COVID. So that is how your organization has shifted its processes, its protocols, its structures, or roles, responsibilities, anything that it did to help employees navigate the impacts after the initial crisis management. So after they said, okay, everyone needs to go home and quarantine and socially distance, and they were kind of, you know, there was that scramble in crisis management. As you were settling into dealing from working from home and all of these different stressors, what were the changes or shifts that happened? And you can think about it from the larger organizational level. So those could be mandates and policies, how they dealt with shifting priorities. You know, obviously things kind of went out of whack and things were adjusted accordingly. So how did they navigate that? And tracking progress on initiatives. You could think about it at the team or department level. So how did they encourage collaboration or communication as people were working from home? Alignment or decision-making, delegation of work, and again, shifting priorities. Or you could think about it on your personal level. So what did you do to shift your own way of working or how you prioritized work? So take a minute just to think about some of those changes or strategies or tactics that were used. And on the mural board in that new area, add post-its with the changes that you thought of that reflect those different aspects, and organize them according to the changes that you felt worked well, or what could have worked better, what kind of had more negative impacts possibly, or made you less productive or efficient, or impacted your own you know, mental state. Or things that had neutral or impact that's still yet to be understood. Maybe things haven't quite settled down to see what the real impacts are of some of those changes. I know we're asking you to make a judgment call on this, but this is kind of a way of just understanding, in your point of view, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. And we can kind of share and learn a little bit more about some of the best practices. So I am going to put 3 minutes up on the clock for us to add some post-its in the different areas. If anyone has questions, let me know.
Yeah, I'm just really having trouble getting to the right place in the mural. So it's a problem for me. I'm not sure what I'm missing here.
Sure. So Marcy, if you, here, I will ask everyone to follow me. I'm on the right place in the board. So if you click on the little pop-up.
Okay. So I see the right place on the board. Now trying to get it to be of appropriate size that I can see it and work on it.
Yes, that's a great question. So let me grab as an example.
Because I see where you all are.
Yeah.
And
so if you zoom in too, you can hold down Control on your keyboard and zoom in that way. Just wheeling in on your mouse should help zoom in a little bit.
Nope, I've got a hand there. It says I'm in move mode. Should I get out of move mode?
I think if you, let's see.
Why am I in move mode?
There we go. So if you go down to the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a little map of the mural board. There's a little hand there. If you click on that, that'll take you out of move mode.
Okay.
Is that working?
Yeah, now I'm trying to zoom. Oh, no, it's got me back in move mode. Get me out of there. It does not want me out of move mode. Turn off move mode. Okay.
And if you do want to move, if you want to use that move mode, instead of turning it on and off, if you hold down the space bar, it'll turn into the little hand and you can just click and drag around the board.
Right. Okay.
So about 30 seconds left. Okay, finish up what you were typing. So if you're all done, take a look at what people added, the different post-its, and I'm gonna be asking if anyone notices any patterns across what's worked well, what could have gone better. Okay. So what patterns are you seeing? I'll open it up to the group. Feel free to just chime in.
So one that I'm seeing is a lot of talk of flexibility. So adjusting expectations, flexibility for management and coworkers, promoting breaks and self-care, coworkers giving grace and support. So I'm hearing a lot, looking like there's lots of flexibility is talking about a great thing.
Yeah. And we've been hearing that, flexibility, and I see also, supportive manager who's flexible and understanding, coworkers giving grace and support, supporting breaks and self-care. There's this kind of human aspect to it, giving people a little bit of room and space and to manage the best way that they can, given all of the different limitations that we're all experiencing. What else? What do people see?
I thought it was interesting. There's a couple on here about innovation, right? Like Zoom in-house. I think the coffee meetings is a little bit of innovation, increased appetite, more tools for virtual collaboration, work from home productivity, budget for home tools. Like some of those things feel really innovative to me, especially for some of the big companies that are on the call. Like just the ability for them to be able to reach out and do those things seem pretty remarkable. If you were to look back 12 months, I don't think a lot of these would be on the board.
Yeah, that's a great point. This crisis has kind of made us react a lot quicker and a lot more innovatively in creativity, I think, than we may normally. I feel like it's actually made us more agile because we've had to be.
Right.
So that's a great insight. I'm actually curious. I see to that point that someone put increased appetite to innovate.
Yeah,
I'm
I did
curious
that
to learn
actually.
more. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm finding that our leadership, especially at the executive level, is seems to be really intrigued by, so they've done a lot of things like rolling out better tool sets. There seems to be an openness to discussion around investing in collaborative tools. And then I think there's also, the dialogue has shifted pretty radically around how do we design and build experiences that are way more meaningful for our users, knowing that they're now completely virtual, and how do we support that? What sort of appetite exists inside of our leadership has been pretty exciting. I don't know that it's trickling down as far as it could, but I think there's a lot of interest now at the executive level at our company.
I think that's exciting to hear, because a lot of times you hear about, and maybe it was initially people kind of putting innovation aside and focus on de-risking, but it sounds like, you know, whether it was at the very beginning or starting to emerge now, you know, companies are coming back to that creative and that innovation area.
Yep.
Exploring. Great, thanks for sharing. Anyone else? What about the things that could have gone better? Looks like we've got salary cuts and layoffs and kind of that tightening of the belt, to put it one way.
Could somebody talk about toxic optimism? I'm super intrigued by that one.
Oh,
That was me. Can you hear me? Sometimes my
yes.
computer doesn't work well. Yeah, that's that whole part that, how you doing? You know, when I really ask you how you doing, and it's hard because I'm a director and I've got people below me that I know suffer from depression. And when my boss asks how everybody's doing, there's a little bit of a requirement of toxic optimism. Like, well, they're doing okay. They're pretty good, because it's just a really interesting dilemma in terms of, you really want to say, I'm not doing well today, but there's maybe a penalty for that, or your staff. So it's a really interesting, I saw the phrase one time and I thought that's a really good phrase for right now, because I don't always feel good. So I tend to be more real with my staff about that, in that particular word, but I probably am not as transparent with my boss.
That's really interesting. I I love that phrase. That's almost the flip side of the coin for having people checking in more and, you know, seeing how everyone's doing. It can flip the other way, where sometimes you don't feel like talking to people.
Right, and I think with people with kids, and my kids are not at home, but I think it could be it's a very difficult situation for them. They suffer.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's see, there's also, you know, meetings, more meetings. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about that. Why it feels like there are more meetings now that we're working from home. If anyone can speak to that.
Yeah,
Well, I found it interesting. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, because the day has no end, right? And people, you know, make assumptions about your time, right? In terms of you're not commuting and you would normally commute from this time. So I think there's more. My day starts earlier, it ends later. I get on at night to finish things. So I just think about COVID-19 and prioritization, and I feel like the same is expected of us and more. So it is like, it's a real challenge. I like not having to commute. I worked for Verizon for 8.5 years in a situation where I worked from home, but it was nowhere near this level of, I'd say, stress in terms of needing to be on and like high achieving at all hours of the day. That's the part that I think is a negative of all this.
I think too, at least in my experience, a lot of the conversations that would happen organically in the office now have to be meetings. And so blocks of time on the calendar feel a lot different than casual conversations. So it feels like you're booked from beginning to end, when really you're just, I mean, those would have just been casual conversations in the office.
Yeah, and I think
too, Matt, to that point, that's kind of what I was thinking. That we were we're coming with from this really collaborative, we try to avoid meetings and we try to talk to people face to face, and we have transitioned maybe poorly, but it's become to have those conversations. Now we have to make sure we like get on people's calendars, and that's really exhausting, and I find myself less productive, but with more to do and more exhausted from all of the meetings, and also frequently being required to have my camera on. So I'm just always having to be on.
Yeah, these are really great points. And actually maybe a topic of exploration when we start to dig into this idea of complexity and disruption. This is great. I think there's a lot of rich conversation here, but I want to move us along to dig in to other areas a little bit more. So thank you again for everyone sharing. Feel free, we'll have this mural board up so you can kind of continue to explore this after our session is done. So I'm going to go back to the slides. Let's see, here we go. So we've already gone through this.
Is there any way to minimize the mural?
To minimize it on your computer?
Yeah.
If you minimize it through your browser, you know, if you click the little minus button, that should minimize it, hopefully. Or you can just click out of it and go back in when we're ready to continue.
Yeah, that's what I've been having to do.
Okay. Yeah, for the next couple minutes, we'll be going into the slides. So, you know, you can get out of the mural board for a little bit. Great. So, thank you again for sharing some of the complexities that everyone is dealing with right now. So I wanted to dig into this idea of complexity just to orient people. And I apologize, the next couple minutes are going to be a little bit more academic feeling, just so we can ground ourselves in what, you know, what complexity means and how it differs from other types of problems or challenges that we might encounter. So I found a quick way of thinking about the different buckets that we can put challenges into. It's helpful. I found this framework is helpful for me, at least, and so that's why I'm sharing it with you. There are problems or challenges that we encounter, such as you know, COVID happening and how that's impacting the way that we work, or even just as simple as figuring out what I should do with my 2-year-old kid when I get home. They vary in terms of along 2 axes. This is around what's happening. So whether there's more agreement across all the different stakeholders around what's happening, what the problem is, what's influencing the issue, and how do you solve for it? So there's this is about the certainty, the level of certainty you have around the solution, the way forward, you know, knowing what it is that we should be doing and how we should be approaching the problem. And so, you know, when you have more agreement and more certainty, those tend to be simple challenges. These are tightly constrained, they're stable, there's a clear cause and effect. And you know, these are things like baking cookies. There's a clear recipe, there's a detailed process and protocol. And if you follow that recipe, you'll get the same, basically the same cookie, the same outcome every time. And you can also think of this, you know, in design terms as designing a login flow. It's pretty, you know, cut and dry and straightforward. And there's certain constraints that are, you know, allowing us to build a certain solution that way. And by the way, I'm going to run through this pretty quickly at a high level. There's a lot more to dig into around this. So if you want to explore more, this is called the Stacy matrix. You can also look into the, it's pronounced Gneffin, but it's spelled like Sinefin framework. So feel free to dig into that area a little bit more. When you have less agreement around the problem and what's happening and less certainty around how we solve it, that gets us into complicated challenges. So these are may have kind of more parts and pieces to them further up than simple problems. They require a deeper level of expertise and analysis. And this really, this is where we look to experts to help provide us with best practices as to how we should navigate these challenges. There's likely to be multiple answers, multiple solutions, but there's still likely to be a best decision to be made. And again, we can look towards experts. We can look back to what has been done in the past to learn from that. And these are, the typical example here is building a spaceship. If we take apart, if we learn from how people built previous spaceships and apply that to what we are doing today, it's a very complicated problem. There's a lot of parts and pieces, and you need, aeronautical engineers and all of these experts with a very, very high degree of knowledge to be able to put it together. Design terms, you can think about, designing navigation on a website. You go through a certain process and exploration to do that, but generally, there's a good answer that should be pretty clear in terms, once you go through that process. Oops, it's going backwards. Then you get into complex problems when there's less agreement around what's happening and less certainty around how we solve it. Challenges are unpredictable and dynamic. There's a lot of interconnected and interrelated factors that could influence a possible solution. So you can think of, I brought up organizational culture and organizational design. Those are all, when you think about how to help, design elements of an organization, that's when all of these bits and pieces really come into play. The people, the processes, the practices, the values, the beliefs. They're all interconnected and interwoven. It's hard to parse them apart, which makes it really hard to kind of get your hands around what the problem is and how we might solve it. And because of that, because everything is kind of shifting and dynamic, cause and effect is only understood in hindsight. So that means if we implement something, if we try out a solution, we only learn, we can't predict how it's going to go. We can only learn from hindsight or from retrospectively. Oh, that makes sense. We did this. We, implemented this new protocol, but and we thought it was going to go this way, but it actually ended up impacting this whole other department. Okay, like now I see why. And you can think about the typical experience of raising a child. There's all of these supposedly best practices out there for how to raise a child, but if you have more than one child, if you raise your child one way, if you follow certain guidelines and practices with one child, that might be completely different for your next child. You can't really, there's not a clear linear relationship between the children and raising them. And you can think about, determining how to safely bring employees back to work is a complex challenge. There's all these considerations in mind around rates of COVID infection in the local area, the type of work that your organization is doing, whether schools are able to open safely and effectively, all of these different things. Oh, I don't know why it's going backwards. And then you get into chaotic challenges where there's lots of unknowables. Cause and effect is impossible to determine since there's no real manageable patterns that exist. So you think about the very beginning when COVID hit, we didn't really know how it was being transmitted. We didn't really know the signs and symptoms to look out for. And so everything was kind of in chaos, and it was really hard to parse out how to best respond. I'll stop there. Actually, I'll go a little bit further and then I'll pause for questions shortly. But the reason why I look to this example is because a lot of times, especially with our work, we start to, it's hard to kind of parse apart what's a complicated problem and what's a complex problem. And it's important to understand this because the most appropriate response for a complicated problem doesn't actually apply to the complex problem. We have different ways that we should be approaching those problems because of the nature of those contexts that we're dealing with. And so if we use, if we solve it one way and we shouldn't, it starts to create issues and tensions. And in order to kind of paint a little picture about the differences between those, I like to use a metaphor of two types of bands or music making. So if you think about an orchestra, you have the focus is on predictability and control. So the members of the orchestra have a precise roadmap and a plan of action. They have their music right in front of them, with all the music notes laid out in front of them. They've practiced many times over. They know exactly what to expect and where they're going. There's a defined vision with metrics of success. They know what a good performance looks like and feels like. It's been established for them. Hitting the right notes on the right time. Clear leadership and hierarchy. You see the conductor here. He's the one running the show. He's the one who's pulling people in when they should. He's the one dictating the cadence and the rhythm and the kind of some of the nuance that comes out of the performance to make sure that he's really getting the best performance out of his musicians. And he's the one who's really prescribing the delegation of roles and tasks. So the goal here, if you think about this as a whole experience, the goal is efficiency and perfect execution. You go to a performance, you listen, and you have this perfect execution of Bach or some other piece of music. That's the goal. On the flip side, you can think about a jazz band, kind of improv jazz band, and how that differs. With a jazz band, their focus is on agility and emergence. And this happens through, they have a shared set of principles to guide the approach. They're coming into the performance not really knowing where it's going to take them or where it's going to go, but they know they can rely on scales, basic set of principles, or the key that they're going to be playing in. They have this shared understanding that they can fall back on to help align them around kind of their approach to the music. They have a high level vision of the desired outcomes. They know, we're going to be playing in this key for this period of time, and we're going to trade off on leadership. So a lot of times there might be kind of a leader of the band, but he kind of gets things going, but he takes a step back, and depending on how the music is going, others come in and show their skills and provide their expertise and their flourish to the music. And so there's this kind of shared collaborative turn taking and kind of co-creation of the music. And this really relies on keen attunement and attention to notice cues. So you can see here, their eye contact is exquisite. Everyone's looking at each other and looking towards each other to know when to come in, when to step back, whether the rhythm is going to change. And so it requires kind of a level of deep presence to be able to pull it off really well. And the goal here is innovation and evolution. They know that the piece of music that they're going to play isn't, it's going to change, it's going to evolve from the last piece that they played. And that's okay, that's what they want. They want it to be an emergent experience. So, so taking those two, we can think about our typical response, especially within organizations, the way that organizations are structured, are set up to kind of have the conductor paradigm of predictability and control, having a roadmap in place, having a clear defined vision with metrics of success, clear delegation of tasks. And again, the goal here is efficiency and perfect execution. But when we're dealing with complexity and all of these different, we don't know what the future is going to look like. We don't know if the COVID rates are going to go up in our local area and whether schools are going to shut down. And we have to approach that challenge with more agility and emergence. And really, how can we evolve the way that we approach situations, the way that we design for them in order to have that new stance. And so if we think about organizational disruption and transformation, again, thinking about our whole topic really occurs here with complex challenges. And when we mistake a complex problem for a complicated one, we can focus on predictability and control over agility and emergence. And ultimately, that will constrain our ability to improvise, pivot, and innovate. This is something, just as a little example, this is something that we're seeing a lot with design thinking training. So we, like many other organizations, come into workplaces and train up staff on design thinking and the different principles and kind of mindsets and methods associated with it. And when done well, that's what it should be. It should be kind of a high level approach, a way that kind of a stance that you take in terms of creative problem solving. When it kind of builds on that idea of designing for emergence, and it's really meant to be built upon the context of the organization. So, the culture of the organization, what's important to them, what their values are, as well as the challenge that you're tackling. So the actual approach around design thinking should shift and change depending on what you're using it for. The problem is when it becomes more of a prescriptive kind of process where you have very set limitations in terms of the roles and responsibilities, and then these are the methods that we use. And even if things don't feel quite right, where we still go down this path and use it as kind of this, again, a prescriptive method. What happens there is that it's not evolving, it's not kind of using design thinking and the value that it brings to the best of its ability. It constrains it. So just hopefully that helps to kind of give you a little bit more insight as to this topic. But I wanted to take a second and pause here and see if there's, again, this is pretty heady stuff. So I wanted to see if there's any questions, any clarifications. Is this ringing true for people?
I have a question. Does
Sure.
the whole orchestra versus jazz band, is that limited to a size of an organization?
That's a great question. Yes and no. So obviously you can see, with the orchestras, they tend to be very large. So it's hard to have this keen attunement and attention in a huge group like this. What are, kind of the best practice or the way to think about that is how can this be broken up into smaller groups to allow for this? So you think about breaking down, into departments or smaller teams to allow smaller groups of people to really, provide them with the constraints not the constraints, but the conditions to work through more of an agile or emergent process. So again, I think it can happen in large organizations, but it depends on the way that the organization is structured and how the different teams and groups of people are broken up and the autonomy that they're given to allow for these new practices to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Okay.
Looks
Any
like
other
we got
questions?
some good feedback in the chat too, from Darren saying this is true for me, giving me a lot to think about. Current role has recently shifted, and this is giving me some really good insight into some of its internal tensions.
Great, yeah, it's I think we're all having to work in new and different ways, and it feels really uncomfortable, not only for us, but thinking about how we can try and pivot as an organization to be more agile and to work more like this. It's tricky. So yeah, I'd love to hear more if we have the time at the end of the conversation.
Looks like there's one more question in the chat. How do you get everyone to agree with the degree of complexity?
That's a great question. I don't know if you can. I think unless you have a very explicit conversation about digging into the problem area and digging into the solution. I think some people will still, there will be certain folks who have a very clear sense of, I know exactly how, what the solution should be. It should be this. But I think when you start, if you start exploring kind of the breadth of the stakeholders to get a sense of what do you think the best solution is, if you start seeing, a lot of different perspectives and ideas, that can start to help you understand, actually, we aren't really aligned around how to solve it. You as an individual may think that you have the right solution, but if you start kind of breaking out of that bubble and exploring other people's perspectives and thoughts and opinions, then that might give you kind of help start to make that more apparent as to whether everyone is really aligned. So that's a great question. Thank you, Marcy. Okay. Wonderful. I was going to have us dig back into our COVID responses to look into whether they relate more to the jazz or the conductor orchestra, but to move us along, I think I might just get into the next piece so we can explore this topic a little bit more and get our hands around it. So just to kind of sum up, as we encounter more and more organizational disruption and complex situations, the question we want to answer is, how might we become more like a jazz group, designing for emergence, designing for agility, and innovation and evolution? And another way we can phrase that question is, how can the way that we design evolve to allow for the unexpected and the transformational to emerge? And that's really the way that I see designing for emergence. It's allowing for the unexpected and transformational to emerge instead of constraining it, instead of prescribing things. So I wanted to get into a little bit of an overview of how we approach this situation about designing for emergence. So the nice thing, as many of us are designers, it generally, we can generally apply a design approach when you think about designing for emergence. The way that the design approach is set up is to be an iterative, evolutionary way of exploring a challenge or a problem. And so you see here with, this is a double loop model of design. There are many different ways that we can represent the design process or the design approach, but this is one that we like to use, where you go through this cyclical approach of really understanding the problem, doing research and synthesis, ideating and concepting, and then you get to a point where if you learn enough about it, you can start doing these little experiments to try out, just to explore the topic a little bit more and understand, are we going in the right direction? Are we really understanding the problem here? And what this helps us really do is to sense and explore what's possible. So here we're really kind of getting our hands around what the problem is through this iterative cycle of exploration, understanding, learning, and hopefully doing some experiments where we can learn a little bit more. The next cycle is kind of typically like what you would consider more agile or Scrum type process, where you're going through cycles of designing, testing and learning and refinement. So test, learn, and iterate, where you're really exploring, you're kind of sensing, okay, we're putting something into practice, we're building something, we're putting it out there into the world to understand, to see how people respond to it, and to sense, what the impacts are and what people's reaction are to it. So again, our design process, the way that we approach organizational change and organizational design, is using a modified form of this to really bring through, so we can sense and explore what's possible and what's needed, and sense and respond to what happens when we start implementing some organizational changes. I will say there's a couple nuances to this, to kind of using the design process that I wanted to highlight. And those are, when we think about the design process, we want to make sure that that our focus is on principles over details. So this is really about helping us develop a vision for the ideal outcomes. So we're really focused on aligning around the why. Why is this topic important? What is the impact? What are the ideal impacts that we're trying to achieve? And why is that important to us? Without over designing and over planning the what or the how. And so, if we go back to this loop here, this is where I would caution everyone to, we can get into endless cycles of research and synthesis and analysis and over analyzing, especially when it comes to really big, complex situations. Again, because things are dynamic, it's really hard to kind of put something down, write it down and put it in stone, because things change and emerge constantly in these types of situations. And so I would encourage you to do some of that, but don't go overboard and try to kind of boil the ocean, but start to kind of get your hands around it and actually start experimenting earlier on rather than later on, so you can start to see, if the way that you're thinking or understanding this challenge is really matching the way that you're approaching it. Another guideline, prioritizing co-creation over execution. So this is really about bringing more people in to help develop it, to help understand it, to help unpack it. And this is where, especially with these complex challenges, when you think about organizational design or organizational disruption, any change that you implement is going to be felt by others. And so the more that you can tap into those who are going to be impacted, the more that you can tap into their sense of ownership and autonomy to be able to to co-create the solution with you, the more that will enlist them in the changes. They'll feel that sense of ownership over them. And a quick example of this is there's a large organization that wanted to shift their company culture to being more of a people-first culture. And so that was literally their kind of the tagline. And obviously that's really general and high level, but instead of the CEO basically dictating, here's what that means, here are the different kind of metrics of success that we're going to implement around that idea, he actually took several years of doing different activities and programmatic sessions with people from all different levels of the organization to help make meaning of that phrase for them. So what does people first mean to you as someone who's in sales, or as someone who's working in the factory, as someone who is in customer service? And so what that did is that allowed each person to make meaning of it, to really kind of ground it in how that impacts them and their work. And they actually allowed the employees themselves, the departments, set their own success metrics around how they use that phrase, how they would measure success on that people first phrase. And because of that, people that increased their retention rate, people were much more respectful of one another, and by the end of this whole kind of culture shift, that actually improved their profits, their overall profits dramatically. And so it was clear that allowing people to own this idea and kind of co-create it and make meaning of it themselves really helped to help them buy into it and to make it successful. Another thing, acknowledge that there's not one right path. I think so many times we want to know, we want predictability because that allows us to have some kind of control over what ends up happening. But again, because it's dynamic, because things happen, because it's shifting and changing, there's all these different possible future states that we need to consider and that we need to explore. And the more that we can kind of map that out in a high level way, kind of understand what the possible parameters are, the more that we can stay open to those unexpected pivots and kind of design for those different paths to emerge. And then finally, bolstering your sensing capabilities. This is really about, if you go back to the double loop, sensing, that idea of sensing is in both the first loop and the second loop. And that's because the more that we can kind of be the jazz band in having that eye contact with each other to really understand and notice what's happening, whether it's in the, in our company, whether it's internally within us, when it's between, our colleagues and I, in terms of the whole organization, and even outside of the organization and with our customers and our bigger market, we can be able to track reactions and changes that might be more obscured or harder to pick out. This is where we can hold space for noticing, listening, and dialogue to really get other people's perspectives on, they might have a completely different way of seeing what's happening, or a way that they're experiencing what's happening that we should be taking into account. In a quick way of, this bolstering your sensing capabilities doesn't have to be a huge lift. This could be something as simple as what MadPow has done recently, where our executive leadership team was trying to figure out where are people's heads at in terms of COVID and coming back to work. So they put out a quick little survey. I think it was like a 95% response rate. So almost everyone filled it out, and it gave everyone an opening to say how they were feeling, what they were comfortable with, what they didn't feel comfortable with. And that really helps guide their decision around, are we ready to open? Are people feeling like we're ready to open? We're not. It became apparent. And so that allowed them to kind of pivot their strategy and really focus on what was needed from their employees' perspective. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions around this. The next piece is actually, we're going to do an activity back in Mural where we're going to use some of these principles and start to explore a challenge that you might be grappling with. So I'll pause there. Hopefully it's hitting home for everyone. Great, well, feel free to put a question in the group chat or speak. Otherwise, we're going to get into an activity. So just to kind of outline the different things that we're going to be doing in this activity, we're going to spend the next 30 minutes. Each person is going to have their own little template where they're going to go through a series of activities to dig into a challenge. And so we're actually not going to pair up. We're just going to have each person choose a problem and sort through a couple of questions to make sure, is it fitting in the complicated space or the complex space, just to kind of use that little framework that we had earlier. We're going to explore alternative futures to help set some principles around how you might approach this problem. This is really about helping you explore multiple possibilities of different outcomes. We're also going to determine the scope of influence. So we'll unpack who are the people who are directly influence this challenge that may need to be involved in kind of the co-creative aspect of it, or the people who are more indirectly influence it. And then we're going to use that to identify focus areas. So we're going to use a very loose form of a 3 horizons model to really map out, okay, what should we tackle now, or what can we assess later, and what can we deal with at a later state once we've understood the problem more and learned from it. So what I'm going to do is open up the activity side of the mural. And so you'll see here, let me just show you on the screen. I have an example of a challenge. This is actually built around COVID and schools opening. And so I walk through just an example of how I define the challenge. I've kind of put like my little mark here, and we'll walk through each step together. We have prescribed times that I'll be keeping time on and move you through. We're going to imagine future directions. We're going to identify stakeholders and influencers, and then ending on those learning areas. What do we do now, later, or now, soon, and later? So if you scroll over here, you see lots of little, little versions of this template. What I want you to do is go back to the introductions side. So if I'll have you follow me. So you can come back here, and next to your name, next to where you have your name, there's this little dot with a little, if you zoom in close enough, you can see this white piece here. That's a link that'll bring you directly to your template. So if you click on that, you'll go to your assigned template here. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. Let me know if you're having any issues getting in or challenges. Otherwise, again, what I'll do is each one of us will kind of take the next 30 minutes and walk through each of these areas. So starting with defining the challenge. And again, this can be a top of mind challenge that you're having at work or in life that felt like it had the elements of complexity. So there's lots of interconnected aspects, or there's little agreement on the problem or clarity on the solution. If you can't think of a challenge yourself that feels directly relevant, you can put yourself in your organization's shoes to explore something around how they're shifting, how they're accommodating the shifting nature of the pandemic. So it could be around how to determine when employees are ready to go back to work, or something. How do we deal with needing meetings scheduled, but having people feel completely overwhelmed by the sheer number of meetings. So take a couple minutes just to kind of think of something that you want to explore and add it on a sticky note in the area. So I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock. And again, if you have any questions or anything comes up, you can chat us, you can ask a question.
And something that might be helpful to think about is complex challenges can be across different scales. So even if it's the example challenge of like getting kids back to school or thinking about back to school and COVID-19 is a really huge scale problem, but there are still complex issues across any different scales. So things like Lindsey had mentioned about the meetings or burnout, things like that are all still complex, even though they might be on a smaller scale.
That's a great point. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah.
I'm going to attempt putting some music on so we're not having silence, but if you want to put your own music on, that's fine too. It comes through a little bit tinny, unfortunately. Okay. Hopefully that gave you enough time to think of a challenge. Oh, there we go. Okay, so what we're gonna do is move on to the next section. And that's where we're going to imagine future directions. So this is about, again, exploring different possible paths that can happen. And the way that I would encourage you to explore this activity is to, actually, sorry, let me share my screen again so you can see where I'm at. In box number 2, imagine future directions. This is really around exploring the possible scenarios that might play out within this challenge. So here, I would encourage you to first explore the best case scenario. So if everything went smoothly, what would happen? What would that look like? And this is just, again, high level. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just kind of explore in your head what that might look like. Then go over to the worst case scenario. If things went badly, what would happen? What would that look like? And add some thoughts there. And then you can go to the likely scenario. So what do you think would be most likely to happen? After that, if you take the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, you'll see underneath, what are the signs and signals that you would expect to see to know that you're heading in that direction? So this, you could think of different ways that you might, kind of metrics or data that you might see. So for instance, I have here, people would start or continue to wear masks around for COVID. And so the signs or signals, you would start seeing more people wearing masks. You would have reduced rate of COVID across the country. And specifically around schools, if schools were opening, if teachers felt like the schools had the right funding to ensure proper PPE and cleaning and sterilization, you would see increased level of comfort for parents and children to have in-person learning happen. So just very basic high-level things to help you explore different possibilities. So again, navigate to your particular template, and we'll put 10 minutes on the clock to imagine future directions. And I'm not sure if anyone else is getting it. I'm getting a lot of lag with Mural updating changes, so bear with us. Hopefully it gets better.
Yeah, I'm seeing a few folks in the chat saying that they might just write it out, write it on a note program or something like that, writing it on paper. That works too. Well, I'm going to try to get rid of some of the extra stuff on here to see if that might help, because I'm experiencing the lag as well. So
that's a great point. Thanks.
But if it works better to work on pen and paper or something like that for now, I think that is an okay solution.
Hey, Lindsay, it's Ryan. Could you zoom in on the questions we're addressing for this part of the exercise for Beth, please?
Sure. Yep.
Thank you.
Let me zoom out.
Yeah, it would just really helpful just to have the template, actually.
Yeah, you know what? What I'm going to do, I'm just going to take a quick screenshot of the template. I don't know what's going on with Mural. And send that over to you guys.
Yeah, for some reason, it's very hard to go back and forth between Zoom and Mural because the Mural doesn't have a minimize button. And so like, I'm trying to find the right place at the right level of Zoom for some reason has been incredibly hard for me.
I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, let me. I'm gonna, so what I'll do is I'll just take screenshots of each section and post it up on the chat. And so that way people can take each section as it comes. And then at the end of this session, you know, before, once we're done, I'll send out the PDF of this activity so you can continue to explore it after this session is done. So bear with me 1 second. Ryan, it's not letting me attach an image in the chat. Is there an easy way to do that?
Did you copy the image or did you save it to your desktop?
Saving it.
And if you go to File, Your Computer, you should be able to navigate to where it's saved. If you want to send it to me in Slack, I can share it as well.
Okay. Apologies for the on-the-fly changes, folks. Okay, great. So Ryan is sending that out to everyone in the Slack chat now. I'll put 6 minutes on the clock here. Give us a little bit more time. Okay, we have about a minute left. Okay. Time is up. Hopefully that helps kind of distinguish what possibilities there are. So the next section, which Ryan is going to share out in the chat, is identifying stakeholders and influencers. Late reaction. So to determine kind of where the boundaries of the challenge are and where and its impact, this is about identifying the people that are impacted or will impact the outcome of this challenge. Who are they and what do they need? So we've broken it into people who have direct influence. So, you know, people who are directly or impacted by or are impacted by the challenge. So whose voices would need to be heard in helping to solve for this challenge? And then there are folks who have more partial influence that may have some influence over the challenge or have a stake in the outcome. So you could think of this again using the example of COVID and schools opening. The key stakeholders are parents, teachers, children, and school administration. I've just kind of sketched out here and what their different needs are. Partial influence are organizations, so people who are impacted by whether schools are open or not, depending on their employees' availability and different priorities. And then the communities themselves, so businesses, schools, churches, you know, the community at large. So we'll take another couple minutes to have you sketch out some of the different stakeholders that are part of this challenge and what their needs are. Take one more minute. Okay, finish up your last Post-its. And then we'll move on to the last activity. Okay, so the final one is what we're calling learning areas. So given what you plotted above, all of the activities that we did earlier, what is emerging as the most critical questions or issues that we should tackle now? And what can be determined once you have more information and direction? So this is just a simple way of plotting out, you know, what can we start now? What should we address soon after we learn a little bit more about certain aspects, and what can we just put off for later? So kind of a quick prioritization exercise. And you can see some of the examples that I brainstormed around the topic of COVID in schools here. So I will put, let's see, I'm gonna give enough time for conversation. So I'll put 4 minutes on the clock.
We've got just about 1 minute left. that is just about time.
Great, so finish up your last thoughts. And then, if Mural will work for me, I can show you when we send this template out so you can continue to use it if it's been helpful for you. We're also going to send, what the next part of this process would be defining what we call a change experiment. So once you kind of have, you've defined the challenge, done some exercises to explore different aspects of it, this is where you would start to identify a change experiment. So this is a lightweight way of exploring an idea of or possible direction for a solution. This is really meant to have you generate more learning about whether it's moving you in the right direction or not. And so in a similar way, it has different questions and activities that you can do to start thinking through what's a little experiment that you can do that you can put into play to start making changes and making movement. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to hear from you all how that went, again, besides the technical issues, whether there were interesting insights or ahas that emerged for you doing this exercise, whether there were things that felt hard to do or difficult to uncover. Yeah, I just want to hear how it went and some of the things that you found doing the exercises. Darren, yeah, let's put you up.
It's something that I realized as I was working through this. I found this a challenge because even taking a situation, which for me is, I think, dealing with burnout and coming from a bunch of kind of interconnected things and how to address that, what are the areas most, I don't know how to end that sentence. Where are the areas that I can adjust with the most actionable steps, I suppose. It's really hard because I want to make this situation, I just want to make it complicated. Is that correct? Complex is after,
yeah.
Like I want to make everything,
I want to give
everything, here is a solution. Yeah. And
yep.
So even breaking down, here are the kind of interconnected network of complex issues, I start to try to solutionize and come up with the one right answer. And that stresses me out.
No, that's a great reflection. I think, again, our tendency, because we like to have a direction and kind of feel like we have a plan in place. Of course, our natural way of working through it is to solution it. And so that's completely understandable. And that might actually be an approach that you can take to try. Again, the next part of this would be doing that change experiment. So if you feel like it's really hard to go through this process and unpack it, maybe where your energy is taking you is to explore a possible solution. And so that's where we would encourage you to fill out the next template to start to define, okay, what's the solution that I can put into place? What are the, what's a small lightweight way of testing whether it's in the right direction or not? What changes would I expect to see within myself, within my colleagues, within the larger organization, and how can I kind of keep tabs on that? So I think that's completely valid, and I think it's not an uncommon kind of reaction to going through this process, is wanting to put a stronger solution in place. I think my suggestion there would be, again, treat it as less of a is this the right solution? Is this the only way that it could go? And use it as kind of a learning opportunity to see if, is this getting us closer to where we want to go or further away from? And again, keeping that kind of cycle of iteration in mind as you explore that. So that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other insights that people had?
This is Linda Redding. So as I'm doing the process, I'm trying to figure out, I'm going to hold a requirements session. And what I realize is that the actual form would work well for the requirements session, right? I'm trying to figure out how to hold the session, right? And then and I thought, well, why don't I actually also use this at the session, because that would really help them start to think about. So it was kind of a duh moment. But.
No, that's great. That's great. Again, you know, as I said at the very beginning, these are things that you can use on your own, just to kind of unpack something, or you can use it with a larger team to actually kind of do it with other people to break down a challenge. So I think that's great that you already have a starting point for how you might run that session. Thanks for sharing. Any last thoughts? I see, Beth, you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, debating on the last thought. I was thinking as the exercise I used was around, you know, meeting some challenges when it comes to process and efficiencies within, you know, our company, and how we bring them on board for digital. And it, you know, could be something as simple as like, you know, demands that we're getting from different support teams that we help, and just kind of need for more digital resources, and how that, you know, the current process it's not really flexible in terms of how we use it. So kind of getting, you know, the teams, you know, buy-in and kind of alignment really on how we move forward, and think about, you know, just being a little bit more efficient with our time, and engaging in some digital, you know, collaboration tools and resources. So I think, you know, I found it's just interesting because I've been meeting with the crew in my organization to talk about these issues the last couple of weeks. And I think we kind of got to this design, you know, defining in terms of how you've laid it out here. But I definitely think having a tool like this would be really helpful, you know, even as I think about how to engage, you know, other roles within the organization. I think in terms of having just a collective like vernacular about how we talk about this, right? And so I like that it's a really simple, easy way to understand and distill a lot of the complexity.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, each one of these pieces could be built out and made a whole exercise in addition to, you know, what we have here. There's a whole, you know, I think a lot of us probably have done stakeholder mapping, but that can get very complex, and you can start to get all these different kind of levels of people and how you're involved, how you involve them. Also imagining future directions. Liz actually did a webinar on futures thinking that I would encourage everyone to go explore through our MadPow webinars, but it gets into, kind of breaks down different types of futures that you can imagine. And so there's a lot of exciting ways that you can kind of explore these different areas in more depth, and where, but that's great that this is just a quick, simple way of kind of laying out all the different parts and pieces of the challenge. So thanks for sharing. So to wrap up, thanks everyone for sharing and going through that exercise despite the technical difficulties. So just to kind of sum up really quickly, you know, complexity is part of our everyday life and continues to be part of our work, as we know. It's not just with COVID, but it's with all these, you know, organizational disruptions and economic downturns and competition from other organizations, and how that impacts, you know, our own organization. And so the better equipped that we are to handle these types of situations, the more effective that we can be. And so we hope that this workshop helped you better understand different types of problems, how to recognize the different, you know, the appropriate approach to use, and offer some guidelines and activities to provide you with more clarity. And so where do you go from here? We're hoping that you will bring back these insights to your organization and to the way that you do work. But specifically, if you lead a team, you know, Beth, just as you mentioned, you can bring these principles and these activities to your team's work to explore these different areas, to use it in different meetings and workshops to explore. If you're part of a team, suggest using some of these activities. You know, to explore different ways of approaching challenges, or, you know, if you don't have that leadership role, do them on your own and see what comes out and present that back to your, you know, your team lead and take the conversation from there. So again, if you'd like to explore more about this area and start to dig into some of these more meaty conversations around how to start implementing some of these challenges, or how we can enact some of these changes, then we'd love to hear from you. So please reach out. With that, we are 1 minute over. I will let everyone go have the rest of their day back and have lunch. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and be on the lookout for an email from Ryan with the PDFs and the recording. Thanks all.